Continuation of Chapter 7. Second category, the partisans of the separation of church and state. Here is another category of mitigated liberals. Quote, "There are others, somewhat more moderate, though not more consistent, who affirm that the morality of individuals is to be guided by the divine law, in the family, for instance, but not the morality of the state." End quote. So families should be subject to the law of God, but not states? Quote, "In public affairs, the commands of God may be passed over, and may be entirely disregarded in the framing of laws. Hence follows the fatal theory of the need of separation between church and state. But the absurdity of such a position is manifest." End quote. It is, unfortunately, a widespread opinion, even among Catholics, that the state has no business meddling in religion, that it should let every man free to choose his own, that the state has no interest in spiritual matters, because its role is uniquely temporal. This is not the opinion of Leo XIII. Quote, "Nature herself proclaims the necessity of the state providing means and opportunities whereby the community may be enabled to live properly, that is to say, according to the laws of God. For since God is the source of all goodness and justice, it is absolutely ridiculous that the state should pay no attention to these laws, or render them abortive by contrary enactments. Besides, those who are in authority owe it to the commonwealth not only to provide for its external well-being and the conveniences of life, but still more to consult the welfare of men's souls in the wisdom of their legislation." End quote. It is also the duty of those who rule to protect and uphold the faith of their subjects. Heretics were once prosecuted because the rulers deemed that, by propagating their innovations, the heretics sowed the seeds of discord and strife in society and in the state. Today, everywhere freedom is given, for example, to the Protestants to spread their errors by means of the sects. We suffer the consequences. It is certain that had the Church, with the help of the states, been able to nip Protestantism in the bud in the 16th century, things would be very different today. For it is Protestantism that ushered in liberalism and all its false principles that have corrupted society and are now destroying the Church. According to Leo XIII, the states are obliged to intervene in order to assure that the spiritual welfare of their subjects is fostered. Quote, "And what is still more important, and what we have more than once pointed out, although the civil authority has not the same proximate end as the spiritual, nor proceeds on the same lines, nevertheless, in the exercise of their separate powers, they must occasionally meet, for their subjects are the same, and not infrequently they deal with the same objects, though in different ways. Whenever this occurs, since the state of conflict is absurd and manifestly repugnant to the most wise ordinance of God, there must necessarily exist some order or mode of procedure to remove the occasions of difference and contention, and to secure harmony in all things. This harmony has been not inaptly compared to that which exists between the body and the soul, thus the union between the state and the church, for the well-being of both one and the other, the separation of which brings irremediable harm to the body, since it extinguishes its very life. Vatican II, instigator of the ruin of good concordats. These words of Leo XIII absolutely condemned ahead of time what was said the day of closure of the Second Vatican Council, the 8th of December, 1965, in the name of Pope Paul VI by Cardinal Lienard, who read the first message addressed to rulers. Quote, "In your earthly and temporal city, God constructs mysteriously his spiritual and eternal city, his church. And what does this church ask of you after close to 2,000 years of experiences of all kinds in her relations with you, the powers of the earth? What does the church ask of you today? She tells you in one of the major documents of this council, the one on religious liberty, she asks of you only liberty." End quote. This is not what Leo XIII demands. No, liberty alone is not enough. There must be a compact, a union between two powers. As for Cardinal Lienard, he continues, quote, "She asks of you only liberty, the liberty to believe and to preach her faith, the freedom to love her God and serve him, the freedom to live and to bring to men her message of life. Do not fear her." End quote. This position is false and inadequate. The state should help the church. Otherwise, it might divest itself of all interest in the church's affairs, maintenance of buildings, compensation of priests. If from one day to the next the government were to say that henceforth it would cut off all payments to the church, in what state would the church find herself? Some say that it is better to be in a state of freedom, as in France, where the priests are not paid by the government. Yes, but one has to see the real poverty in which priests often live. In very many countries, tax exemption is granted to religious groups. If the church had to pay, that would represent enormous sums. The situation in Germany is peculiar. The priests are not paid by the government, but by the bishops. Even so, all the Germans pay to the state a worship tax and must declare their religion. A part of this revenue, in proportion to the number of declared Catholics, is paid to the bishoprics, and with this the bishops remunerate the priests. That is why in Germany, as well as in certain Swiss cantons which have the same system, the clergy is not poor. The diocesan offices resemble ministries with a sizable administration. That is why the German Church can help South America and send funds for the missions everywhere. It can even happen that the priests have too much money. Good salaries, tax exemption, gifts, mass stipends, and it certainly isn't good for a priest to be too rich. There is no danger of that happening in France, where they receive no aid whatsoever from the state, and where the bishop can only remunerate them by giving a part of the tithes. In the little dioceses, this means poverty. I remember the Diocese of Tulle, where the people were not rich, and where the collection produced very little. One could only give very little to the priests, but they bore their poverty with courage and great virtue. Even the special collections brought very little. It was true misery. This allows the French priests to take an independent stance. The traditionalist priests can take advantage of it, as they are supported neither by the state nor the bishops, but by the faithful, while in Germany or Switzerland, as soon as they leave the rectory, they lose all their income, and the faithful, accustomed to paying the worship tax, are not accustomed to supporting their priests. Hence, they give proportionately less than the faithful in France. It is sad to say, but the material question always plays a role in life. It requires a great deal of courage to be able to bear to live in poverty. It is approximately the same situation in Italy, where the priests are paid by the state. The day they leave their parish in order to join a traditionalist group, they know that the next day they will be without an income. So there are certain inconveniences in relying upon the state for a living, but that is nonetheless the normal state of affairs. Footnote: formerly, the priests had a living thanks to the revenues from ecclesiastic benefices, as the Church had the right to own property in her own name without the authorization of the state, and this is the just state of affairs. But, as a consequence of the Revolution, or the Masonic despoliation of church property, the clergy was reduced to a state of public beggary, save where the Concordat regulated with the state the subvention of the clergy. End footnote. This is why Leo XIII expresses the meetness of the union of church and state, which can be regulated by concordat. What is abnormal is their separation. It is like the union of the soul and the body, or the union of spouses. They often quarrel, but must one therefore conclude that it would be normal for them to separate in order to avoid quarrels? One falls into the absurd. It is scarcely a good reason to clamor for this separation just because some difficulties arise, as was done in the name of Vatican Council II. At the request of the Church itself, excellent concordats were suppressed. We will suffer the consequences. For Leo XIII, then, the states must not be indifferent to the spiritual welfare of their citizens. By means of material aid, they must help religion to endure and to develop. As to which religion they must help, the Pope specifies it